Good evening and thank you for joining me on Black News Tonight. I'm Marc Lamont Hill. Today kicked off week 2 of trial of the former Brooklyn Center police officer Kim Potter. She's charged with first and second degree manslaughter in the death of Daunte Wright. Wright's autopsy report was shared in court today, an assistant medical examiner saying his gunshot wound was not survivable. Prosecutors also weighed in on the differences between Potter's handgun and her taser. While the defense called the shooting a horrific mistake, they insisted that Potter was within her rights to use deadly force because Wright might have dragged and injured a fellow officer by driving off. Wright was shot and killed on April 20th after being pulled over for an expired license plate. Meanwhile, also in Minnesota, former police officer Derek Chauvin is reportedly set to change his plea to guilty in the federal civil rights case against him. The hearing is scheduled for Wednesday, and Chauvin was convicted of the murder and manslaughter of George Floyd earlier this year. Chauvin and 3 other former officers are set to go to trial in January on charges related to Floyd's murder. Myles Cosgrove, the detective who fatally shot Breonna Taylor during a flawed raid, is appealing his termination from the Louisville Metro Police Department. The LMPD terminated Cosgrove for failure to activate his body cam, as well as for using deadly force when he shot 16 rounds into Taylor's home, including the shot that killed Breonna during a 2020 police raid. Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, confused officers forcing entry for intruders and fired 1 warning shot. In return, officers shot 32 shots into the apartment. The only officer charged in connection with the shooting was Brett Hankison, who is awaiting trial for wanton endangerment. Joining me now to discuss all 3 of these cases is BNC's chief legal correspondent, Laura McNeal. Laura, good to see you as always. Let's start with the Kim Potter trial. There were prosecutors today who spent a lot of time pointing out the differences between Potter's handgun and her taser. They pointed out the weight of each item and the steps that it would take to pull out each item. What impact do you think that demonstration is going to have on the jury?
I think it had a huge impact, and it was really important for the prosecution because what they're trying to establish is, hey, look, you don't have to be a police officer to see the difference between a bright yellow taser and a firearm. Now, if you're on the defense side, they were saying, yeah, actually, maybe it's not so easy to determine the difference. They pointed out that, for instance, the handle of the taser is black, just like the handle of a firearm. The top of the taser is all black. But again, the prosecution's like, come on, if you look at the fact that that bright yellow taser, the color, the fact that the taser has an LED light that's super bright and a screen. So it's important for the jury to use this information to evaluate, were Potter's actions reasonable? Was it a reasonable mistake, or was she reckless?
The state filed a motion today to limit the opinion of witnesses who are not testifying as experts. Can you explain what this means and why the motion was filed?
Yeah, so Mark, this is one of the moments in the trial that I was literally gritting my teeth going, object, object, object. Prosecution basically dropped the ball, and they allowed Officer Johnson, who's this supervisor, the former supervisor of Kim Potter, to act like he was a use of force expert. He said, oh, the statute authorized deadly force, so she could have used her firearm intentionally and it still would have been a justified shooting. And the prosecution didn't object. So they objected after the fact, and now the judge will have to decide whether he's going to tell the jury to disregard the information from Officer Johnson. Why? He's a police officer. He's not a use of force expert. And so that's why they have filed this motion, trying to make sure this doesn't happen in the future. But really, the prosecution completely dropped the ball. Had they objected at the time, it would have never been entered into the court record, and the jury wouldn't have heard it. So that's why now they're kind of playing piggyback and trying to fix something they messed up today, to be quite frank.
All right, well, let's turn to another trial. The federal civil rights case against Derek Chauvin, again, the man who killed George Floyd. What's at stake here? Why do you think he's planning to change his plea to guilty?
I think Derek Chauvin sees the writing on the wall. I mean, he sees the mountain of evidence against him. He thought the state charges were tough. Imagine the feds. They have a much larger and heavier legal arm, or as I like to say, legal gavel. And so he sees reality. The likelihood of him being found not guilty is very slim. And more important, there are still rumors about a plea deal. And if there is a plea deal, it's possible that he's going to get a shorter sentence or be allowed some other type of concession.
Talk to me about Chauvin's previous conviction and plea in this federal case. What does it mean for the other former officers? Will it have any impact on their cases?
You know, it might. I'm kind of on the fence on this one. The reality is their defense team can say, you know what, we see the writing on the wall. This is a losing battle. We need to try to cop a plea deal as well. Or they can say, hey, this is great. We're going to separate ourselves, continue to separate ourselves from Derek Chauvin. He's the one that's culpable. He's admitted his guilt. We were innocent. We were just following the instructions of a superior. So it could go either way with them. It just depends on what their defense's legal strategy is. And if I were their defense attorney, I would recommend that they go ahead and take their chances at trial, simply because we saw that, yes, they played a very significant role in George Floyd's death, but I don't think that they would get, obviously, the same level of prison time, if convicted, as Derek Chauvin.
All right, and finally, Myles Cosgrove. The Louisville Police Union called Cosgrove's firing unjustified. They said that there was no evidence that policies and procedures of the department were actually violated. Is it possible he could actually be reinstated?
I mean, in this world, Mark, anything is possible. I mean, the fact that Eric Gardner's, the cop who killed Eric Gardner is still walking around and was never prosecuted after the videotape. Anything's possible, unfortunately. But this case, I'm going to say no. He says he followed procedures. He didn't. He didn't have his body cam footage on, or body camera on at the time. That's a very set policy for Louisville PD. He says he didn't have to because he was a narcotic officer. Not true. He also, his own department chief said he didn't follow their use of force protocol. He is just someone who's used to getting his way. How dare you tell me I can't be a police officer? And he's really wasting the Merit Review Board's time. And so I would say no, he's not going to be reinstated. Very small chance.
What's the timeline for this decision?
Thankfully, it's almost over. So it's very similar, the review board, to a regular trial process. So they will let us know January 6th. So right after the holidays, he should know his fate, which if they do the right thing, they will not let this officer back on the street. But time will tell.